back in and try it again.
Or you can just, I guess, well, I'm on my phone, so I can't look at my phone.
Yeah, that's what I realized my error has been is I wasn't logged in as Southside.
Yeah.
Let's see. Southside Baptist Church. All right. Let's go here. See if I can run the internet.
Darren, you're not.
That's why I realized my error.
You're not saying anything about the Jags. What does that mean?
I mean, it means Unique Ngakoue got traded away, and I don't know how I feel about
that. They're selling off their assets.
I mean, clearly that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So
that can't be good.
I mean, look, I'm so inundated with political life right now, and I found a new book that I'm about to get into, and I'm really, really scared. So I'm getting into. Have you ever read any of Jordan Peterson?
No.
You ever heard of him?
I've heard of him.
I'm about to read his book. Man, I'm forgetting what it was. I was talking with Ethan Levitt about it today. It's like Maps of Belief or something like that. So I'm about to read that. And I mean, he's kind of like a Carl Jung kind of, I don't know, evolutionary deist is kind of what he is. So yeah. I'm looking forward to getting into his views on why we believe what we believe. It's a different way, different site. So that's my new book I'm about to get into now that I'm through with the right side of history. So I tainted Josiah Houck. We played Fibbage with the Houcks on Saturday. And it's like 8:00 in the morning over there in California. But I got him hooked on the right side of history right before he left. And Rachel was like getting that onto me. So
how are they doing out there? They enjoy. Well, we can't talk about them online. That's not fair. I don't know. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. You can't talk about people like that, Darren. They're private citizens. It's not like talking about Trump and Biden.
Or the Jaguars.
Yeah, or the Jaguars. Yeah, all our members are don't go to that church. They'll talk about you on Facebook Live.
It was so good to see. It was good to see, little Maddie running around and old Beach Baby. It's cool seeing them all. Yeah. But man, I'm logged in as Southside. I don't know if I'm going to see comments or not.
Well, maybe Megan will help us.
Hey, Megan, if you're on, type a comment, or if somebody's watching right now, just type a comment. We want to see if we see anything.
We've only been doing this for 5 months, and we're just now figuring out that we've been ignoring your comments this whole time.
That's not true. The past 2 weeks, we have not noticed that you were commenting. And so Gary and I felt like we were in a hole talking to each other.
Well, I was auditioning new co-hosts.
Here's what I love. Brian Cunningham just starts literally getting onto me at 6:30 in the morning last Monday that I'm talking smack about him on here. And that he's going to take my job as your co-host. So,
hey, Brian, we should give him a screen test. He might be a good co-host. I need somebody younger. You're getting old, Darren.
I'm getting old, but so are you. If I'm getting old, I've always told you since you hired me that you could be my father.
Darren,
it'd be a little hard, but you and Sherry did know each other.
Oh, now listen, you were doing okay when you brought her into it. Now she'll burn your house down.
I've told her the same thing too,
Did she smack you?
No, I think it was one of my first conversations with Sherry. That's how our relationship started.
And it's all been downhill from there.
I'm not seeing any comments on here. Do you see any comments?
I'm not on there, so
somebody please test comment.
Well, nobody's watching. See, that's the thing.
No, that's not true. We got 10 people on here watching us right now.
Well, they're watching like you watch a car accident. They're standing in shock and awe and not engaged.
It's 7 o'clock right now, so I mean, we are there. Oh man, what's going on? Let's see. Oh, oh, there are comments. I'm now seeing comments on my phone.
There you go.
All right, there are a lot of comments. Brian rocks. So everybody's saying how much they like Brian right now.
Yeah, they're see the groundswell for Brian as your replacement is getting stronger and stronger.
I know clearly. I mean, I just log in and just, Cindy Crowley is talking about Brian. So I need to sign in as myself, apparently.
He's the Gen Z rock star. See, that's it. You've got to, you need that young, hip. That's why like Biden only does interviews with like, I don't know, what's it?
But seriously, I don't know that you can quote that like Biden is all of a sudden a reason to do anything. Because
I'm not in my basement. I'm upstairs, so that's different.
His poll numbers are not like going up. So he's kind of holding on for life. He's like the Jaguars versus the Patriots right now.
Oh my goodness!
It's like he's not going for that touchdown. He's hoping he can hang on, and it's just going to come down to does he fumble the ball or not. So, So thank you guys for joining in on this Facebook Live. The next series Gary's talking about doing is possibly a political series. Gary, are you going to do a political series?
Yeah, well, every 4 years during the presidential election, we have done a series on faith and politics. And so seriously, that's I think it's important to kind of frame it from a biblical perspective, from a theological perspective. What do kingdom people, how do we react to the political infighting and the polarization, and what's the biblical response? So yeah, we've done it the last 2 times, 2012 and 2016. So it seems like we should do it in 2020. And so that'll come. We'll probably start that sometime mid to late October and carry that through the election and maybe a little bit after.
Did we do Judges right before that series last time?
No, I don't. I'd have to go back and look. I don't know that maybe Judges was that same year, but yeah, Judges was one of my favorite series, and it was kind of buried in the middle of summer when people weren't in church. But yeah, that series from the book of Judges actually has a lot to deal with, what to say about faith and politics, really.
I mean, it has a lot to deal with what we see right now.
It really does. Yeah.
Everybody did what was right in their own eyes.
In their own eyes. Yep. That's right.
Heading into it. You're getting some votes right now. Yes, please do a political series. So
well, hey, send in your this would be cool. Send in your what about faith and politics? Since we've done 2 series already, identifying and knowing what specifically would be helpful is good. So send those in and just put those in the chat box, and that'll help me kind of know how to shape the series, because I'm really just now at the beginning stages of developing and crafting that series. So those comments really are helpful.
Yeah, it's the I said even today in my regional gathering just how much we feel like every presidential election is the biggest one of all time, but it's very interesting watching this one. I mean, this one really could be pretty important. So, it's a unique time in a unique presidential election, to say the very least. So along with all of that, no matter who ends up winning, I'm sure some people will feel like they are exiles. So, so with that, today we did
some people still feel like exiles since the last presidential election.
Correct. So with that, today's sermon, we did Jeremiah 29 and looked at kind of Jeremiah's words as he was going, as the people were going into exile. So thought it was a pretty important discussion because of that. And the small group questions, even if you guys are not in a small group right now, I would encourage you to go ahead and look over those small group questions, do them on your own personal time, do them with your family. Because one of the things I loved about the small group curriculum for this week was the focus on kind of the whole story there of Jeremiah 29. And even kind of looking at it from how the world was rocked and changed. And I think there's definitely some connections with us with COVID. And then it gets into this really personal account of how do you deal when people are giving you hard truths. And so there's a teaser for you to go ahead and just look at that small group conversation because I think it's really applicable for where we are, both on a macro level and a micro level.
Yeah, and I think some people, I'm glad you said that, Darren, because I think some people maybe think, well, if I'm not active in a small group, or the small group I'm doing is doing something different, some different curriculum, that's not really for me. But honestly, those small group discussion guides are really good for even just personal reflection. You could take, each sections of questions one morning a week and really have a good time just reflecting on Scripture and in prayer and thinking about your own understanding of Scripture and how it applies to your life and your circumstances. So that's just a resource that's available, ssbc.org/tools. We keep pushing it, but we're not printing anything and giving it out to online folks. We are mailing it to some folks who are homebound or have asked us to mail it to them. But if you can download that, it's a good little resource every week. We put a lot of time and effort into that. Daily Bible reading plan, some websites you can check out, some other books you might want to read. All those things are there and available for you.
And I'm looking forward to getting back to small groups. So we will have this next week. We'll still do regional gatherings for one more week with Labor Day weekend. And, I'll bring, or Brian is going to, speaking of our Z counterpart, he's going to pick up the donuts for us. I'm just going to pay the donuts. But he's going to pick up all the donuts for everybody and come. And we're going to have donuts and some coffee next Sunday. And it'll be just a good time for us just to recap some loose ends from the regional gatherings, especially Go Jacks and outreach, and even what is the difference between Go Jacks and outreach. And then we will go ahead and launch our small groups on September 13th. And we will have some small groups that will be doing those study guides and sets there. Megan Gardner, also Johnny on the Spot, went ahead and posted the worship guide in the comments section. So
she's so good.
I know if you need anything, now that we can see what Megan's doing behind the scenes on Facebook, if you want to see that, you can follow that link that she posted right there and plug in. I don't know. So what is kind of left that you didn't say with Jeremiah 29? How are you feeling?
Well, Jeremiah, it's probably my favorite chapter in Jeremiah. And I guess the thing that really hits me is how we take out of context Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the thoughts I have for you, plans for good and not for evil, to give you, to prosper you, not to harm you. We love that. That sounds so good until you read it in the context. And the context is so opposite of what we think it is. But without the context, I think that in some ways can give a false hope. It can give this idea that God really is trying to, that his plans for good mean equal comfort and what we are familiar with and what we like. And in fact, what he's saying is no, you don't understand. I'm sending you into exile. It's going to be awful. It's terrible. It's horrible. But the good I have for you is in that hard place. So I think that's a really important message, that especially during COVID and all the uncertainty of the world in which we live, that we should remind ourselves that God is involved in this, and he's got a good plan, not in spite of the hardships, but even because of the hardships.
Yeah, and I think that context was so cool, and we got into it a little bit in the worship guide, just the relationship between Hananiah and Jeremiah kind of saying this. And we didn't really get into that in a sermon just because you missed so much of it, but just how much it traces through the book of Jeremiah here for, two kind of chapters before this statement of just, the false prophets that are preaching up against them. And what I thought was interesting is, and not to derail this conversation into something else, but there in Jeremiah 29, he says, let me pull it up real fast, kind of in a statement about what you're supposed to do. He really talks about, do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to their dreams, to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name, and I have not sent them. And I just thought through, as I was going through some of those questions, I thought through kind of the encounter that that kind of Jeremiah had with this false prophet for a few chapters before, and almost how much God may have been preparing the people to know what a false prophet looks like before they were really sent out into kind of into the abyss with this whole scene, and even this dramatic breaking of the yoke scene. And almost like, why would God have him make that and then have that occur and then have it just linger without anything? And I almost wonder if it was just kind of God instructing through just the scene that may have been. And so I don't know, how much do you take into kind of looking back in your past at what God may have been saying to you when you're in a present kind of exile period? Like I think that's something that may have been going on with the Israelites through this.
Yeah, I think that's essential. I mean, I think you have to put your period of exile in context of your journey. So you have to reflect on that, and you have to give space to say what was God saying to me leading up to this. Because I do think there are multiple reasons you end up in exile. One of them is certainly disobedience. Like, God sent messages that you ignore, and there were warning signs, and you've lived disobediently, you lived rebelliously, and then you end up suffering the consequences of that. That's definitely one way you can end up in exile. But you can also end up in exile because of the evil intentions of other people, or just because of circumstances that are beyond anybody's control. And I think if you end up in exile because of the first, and you don't understand how you ended up in exile or why, then that lesson can be lost on you. And you can spend a lot of time looking for somebody else to blame, as opposed to realizing, okay, God, I'm here, I'm broken, I'm desperate for you, I'm desperate to change. It's like, our friends who go through the recovery movement, until somebody is willing to admit they have a problem, there's nothing you can do to help them. And that's really true for our spiritual journey as well. Until we come to terms with our own sin and our own brokenness, it's really difficult for us to receive God's mercy and God's grace. And so those times of exile can be wasted times. I've seen that happen a lot. It's tragic. I actually am, another situation, kind of seeing it happen now with someone who's in exile, and I think everybody around this person knows that this person is in exile and why they're there, but this person just can't embrace that and won't. And then you realize it's going to get worse. Like, it's only going to get worse until you surrender to the fact that that's why you're here, and then the fact that God can use this exile to ultimately bring about your redemption. So I think it's important to look back and get the historic context. I don't think it's a place you want to stay. Like, some people live there forever. They're only looking with an eye backwards, and all the regrets and the shame and all that. Like, you come to terms with that, accept it, own it, and then you have to begin to look forward to say, okay, God, this is where I am now, and I know you've got a good plan for me through this. So you have to at some point shift your focus. You can't live in that sort of retrospective, introspective place.
So what's our role, I guess, if we have a friend who's in exile, like what you're mentioning, what's our role as individuals in terms of addressing that within them? How do we do that properly? How do we do that healthily?
Well, I think Jeremiah is a good model. He did it directly, and he did it lovingly, but he minced no words. I mean, he was clear. And I think that we have to do the same. Sometimes people they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to speak out and say something. And then they may even, like, when the train wreck happens, they're like, oh, I saw that one coming. And sometimes I feel like if that's in a Christian community, I'm like, well, shame on you for not saying anything if you saw that one coming, whatever that means. I think we have to speak up. Of course, the problem is it's really difficult to speak up if you don't have the relational capital or relational investment in the person that earns the right to do it. So as we fail to build community along the way, we may be failing to create the kind of relationships that allow people to speak into each other's life. So it's one of the reasons why living in community with each other is so important. Not just living in community with people you like, although I hope you do, but living in community with people who are also passionate Christ followers, who you build a relationship with, that they can speak into your life and you can speak into theirs, and that they love Jesus more than they love you. Because if they love you more than they love Jesus, they're probably not going to risk saying a hard thing to you. So I think it's a process. And unfortunately, we live in an age and a time and a culture where we don't do that as well as we've maybe done in the past. So therefore people aren't, they don't have the relational capital to spend on saying hard things. But I think we follow Jeremiah. We say those hard things in love and in the hope that we can spare someone those difficult consequences.
Yeah, and I think COVID hurts that a little bit because you lose people have just lost not only that community from a church perspective, but meeting with friends, having that direct one-on-one conversation just makes it so difficult in the midst of COVID, to where even if that was just fledgling, it's not there right now. And I think that's another point to the importance of one of the things that we're trying to do, which is this multi-generational approach, is, is it harder to sometimes find the commonality, which really brings that deep friendship? Certainly. That can be hard in a multi-generational relationship because the person isn't necessarily living or doing the exact same things that you're living or doing. But the benefit of that is they're not living and doing that, which means they can see your blind spots in a better way than some people who are just right next to you, just riding along in the same car that you are. And I think that that's just an importance of just having those people around you speaking into your life.
Yeah, and somebody who's already lived through the experiences, the season of building a career, the season of raising young children, the season of parenting teenagers, all somebody who's ahead of you on that journey, who's willing to be vulnerable and authentic, and even share what they've learned from the mistakes they made, is invaluable. Like, they can spare you a lot of hardship if you're willing to listen and they're willing to share. So yeah, I totally agree. I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about in our new strategy for small groups.
So for you guys online, I guess a question for you is, because I see you guys commenting, is there anything that you guys just kind of struggle with in terms of speaking hard truths that you just want us to talk about? Or is there kind of anything else from this sermon today that you want to cover before we kind of kick it off to a new topic of conversation? But I did want to, while I'm looking down at the comments that are coming through, just kind of let you guys know, feel free to comment in on any questions about that or any comments or concerns with it. Yeah, when I'm looking at this, it's a question of how do you form, so you're talking in Jeremiah 29 about planting and being where you're planted, enjoying where you're planted. I'm going to ask this question because it's not coming from me, it's coming from somebody else. But there's somebody else I know that's contemplating moving. Darren's already committed to moving, but somebody else I know that's contemplating moving. I say that because Gary is really upset that I'm not going to be his neighbor anymore. And he's really sad by that fact. But anyway, somebody else I know is moving. And just that question of, how do you know when the right time to move is, or how do you know when the right time to plant is? Like, what advice do you have in terms of knowing when do I need to embrace where I am and embrace kind of the planting? Or how do I know that I really do have freedom to move in kind of the place we are? I mean, one of the difficult things of living in America is we really do have a whole lot of choice and a whole lot of options. And that means that we can really just pick up and do whatever we want. I mean, not just in terms of moving our physical location, but jobs, relationships, even especially with COVID, just across the entire country, people can just pick up and move. And it's almost even easier now with some of the stuff going on in the business world with COVID. So I guess what's your advice in terms of trying to distinguish when should I move and when should I not move?
Well, I think the question's got to be first, why? Why are you moving? I think most people move in pursuit of the American dream. I think that's the number one reason people choose to move, is they're chasing the American dream. They're not chasing God's will or the kingdom. They're chasing, the American dream. So they always tend to climb the socioeconomic ladder. They're moving to an area where they've got more square footage, they've got more amenities, they're surrounded by people who look like them. It's interesting to me that people that we typically, this is changing some in urban cities or in urban cores where people are kind of moving back in, and it's gentrifying, but that's a little differently because it's not necessarily economically diverse, although it does create maybe some greater racial diversity in a smaller geographic area. But it concerns me. For generations now, the American church, and I'm talking predominantly white congregations, because that's what I can speak to with experience and authority. We keep moving away. We keep moving farther away, and we keep divesting ourselves from the local schools because, maybe our school doesn't have the grade we want, or, we're afraid of, exposing our kids to certain things, or, we don't, we're concerned about safety, security. And those are legitimate concerns. I'm not trying to dismiss them. But at what point do you ask yourself, if I'm truly called as an ambassador for Christ, and if I'm truly living on mission to the same extent that the people we commission and send overseas, if those folks were pursuing the American dream, they would never go to the hard places in Africa and the Middle East and, the slums in Europe or Asia, wherever it is there that God is sending them. And I just think, at what point do we have a generation of people in America who rise up and say, hey, why are we waiting for Brazil and South Korea to send more missionaries to the US? Because that's what's happening. I mean, that's the truth. Brazil and South Korea are now sending missionaries to the US. At what point do we realize we already know the language and the culture? All we have to be willing to do is to move into parts of town where we can live missionally, as opposed to our pursuit of the American dream. So I think the question why is really important. Why are you moving? Are you running from something? Or are you running to something? And if you're running to something, what is it? Are you running to what's comfortable and convenient? Or are you running to and towards God's will and heart for the city? And I don't know that I can answer that for anybody. I can't look at somebody and just say, well, clearly you're running toward God, or clearly you're running away from God. I think people have gone on the mission field to run away from God. I mean, honestly, I think there are times people have done that because they don't want to face the hardships of maybe what it would mean to do ministry in post-Christian America. And so I don't know. It's not an easy or clear-cut answer. It involves somebody really seeking after God and saying, God, what are you saying? I just don't know. And I could be wrong about this. I just don't find many people making those decisions based on those reasons. They base them on economics. They base them on, they base them on lots of things, lifestyle, school districts, all that. And I long for the day where I hear people making those decisions because they say, I think God is calling me to move into this community where there needs to be more gospel witness. I think God's calling me to be a part of this struggling school and put my kids there and invest myself there. You hear that every now and then, and it's awesome. But man, I'd love to see us get to a point where Christians in the American and in the US, where that is more normal than it is.
Yeah, Laura Lineberry just added to that. She said, yeah, the American dream is a driving force for many. Sometimes it's easier to move than to try and fix or understand the things bringing discontent in your life where you are. And so just that focus of, everywhere you go, there you are. And, if you find yourself moving from house to house to house, or place to place to place, or job to job to job, or even church to church to church, and the same problem seems to follow you wherever you go, then that's probably something to just say, and why does this keep following me? Why do these feelings about people keep following me and the people that I'm around? Why do I seem that I never really loved my neighbors and all my neighbors just annoy me all the time? If that's the case, and that's where things are, then, some introspection may be at work and say, well, maybe the problem isn't necessarily all the people that I'm around. Maybe the problem is within, and I need to let God tackle that. And I think that's the beauty of Christianity, is you're not even saying I need to tackle that all the time, as much as I need to just open myself up to let the Holy Spirit work. And I think that is really important and oftentimes neglected in terms of kind of Christian counseling or just Christian kind of discipleship, is a statement that, you don't fix that. You just remove your barrier and let the Holy Spirit work that out in you, and be open to how he's going to work that out in you, because sometimes how he works that out in you is by making a whole lot of turmoil happen right there while you're opening yourself up. And I think it's so important just to realize even that sometimes when you open yourself up to God working, things may actually get worse before they actually get better. And embrace that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read one commentator on Jeremiah 29, and he likened the Israelites in exile in Babylon to the suburban sprawling subdivision. He said, they're living on the east by the banks of the river on the edge of town in their gated community where everybody in their community is like them and shares their value and has the same skin tone. Meanwhile, the people in Babylon are diverse and without any witness of this one true God that they say these people believe. And he compared it to, that happened in America. So I think there's real parallels here, and there's real, there's a real call from this passage and others, not the least of which is Jesus and the Great Commission and Acts 1:8, where, God is inviting us to say, hey, leave your cloistered community and move into these places where we need kingdom witness, we need gospel presence there. And of course we need it everywhere. That's always the argument. Yeah, but it's there's lost people in Palencia too. And I'm like, yeah, there are. There are, for sure. But there's a lot of people who sort of say that, and I'm like, I still have yet to see any of them act upon that in such a way. And nothing against Palencia. I'm just for example, again, because I think God can move. But it's just interesting to me how if every believer is moving on the direction of God, in the direction God's moving them, then why are they continually moving into less diverse, less impoverished, less, in areas where there isn't as obvious a need for the gospel? Like, this is a hard conversation, and you brought it up, Darren. So
I'm fine with it. And here's where I think of with this conversation too is, and I don't know, this may not be the politically correct thing to say, especially at this time, but when I look at just people migrating and people's movements now, I do think that it's been a big thing of, and Sam Clausen even highlights the white flight. I do think that was big in the past, but I think racial issues, I know they're big right now, but the truth is they're big right now, but we're ignoring an even larger divide in American society, which is economic divide.
That's right.
And there's a place where I think we're moving into a place where it's even less white flight as much as just class flight, that we're flying out of certain economic kind of classes, and people are leaving and going all over the place, but they're never actually meshing with others of other socioeconomic classes. And in a way, I feel like that's even more dangerous at times than even the racial divide.
Well, I think that's true, but it's important to recognize there is a strong correlation between socioeconomic level and race. You can't ignore that. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but you can't disentangle those two either, because I've heard that argument made a lot as an excuse to say, well, I'm not, it's not really about the race, it's the economics of it. And I get that. But I also think that in some cases that's a cover for race, and that's a concern too.
Yeah, man, this things are going off right now in the chat, man. This is getting interesting now. Yeah, and Mike Reed highlights this idea of tribes.
Yep.
Tribes lose their sense of mission when they drive their tent stakes in too deep too. And so talk about these Bedouin tribes and how they lose their sense of mission when they just stay put in one place.
Sure.
And yeah, I definitely think that's the case too. Always being willing to pick up and move wherever God is calling you to is, I think, a principle in the Bible, not to get too comfortable in one position or in one place, but always to be willing to hold it all open-handed to God and let God kind of determine what he should do and what that next move should be. And I think that the principle of church ministry, and I've told other people on staff when they've thought about moving churches, the same point, and I got it from Tom Rainer, but it's this idea that anytime you're supposed to go, there should be a call and a pull at the same time. So there should be this feeling like you should go, and there should be this pulling. And I think it's distinguishing, is that pull of God or not of God? And is that call of God or is that call of myself? I think that those things need to be looked at, but he always says, don't do it unless both things are occurring in a ministry setting. I think that honestly could be extended beyond a ministry setting and go into every area of life. If I'm really supposed to move, should I look at myself and say, okay, is there a pull for me to go to this place? And then is there kind of like a push out to go there too?
Yeah.
And if one or both aren't existing, then maybe you shouldn't go if both aren't.
And I agree. And I think that's good in principle. And I've read that or heard that from Thom Rainer as well. The thing I would say back, the thing I would push back is God is not the only thing who pushes and pulls.
Yeah.
I think we've got to be real clear on that there is an enemy and there is temptation and there is our flesh. And our flesh pushes and pulls and the enemy pushes and pulls as well. So discerning, not just that there is a push and a pull, but discerning who is pushing and pulling. That really is a critical question when you use that idea. Because I agree with that, but it's got to be God's push and God's pull, not just the enemy. Because there are times where, I mean, let's just face it, there have been times where we have all felt pushed and pulled because we're facing a hardship and we feel the push and pull to run away. Like we're facing opposition, so there's the push. We don't want the conflict, so there's the pull. I want to run away from it. And we can use that same argument to say, well, God doesn't want me engaged in that because it's hard. And, we pull a Jonah. Like that's, Jonah felt a push and a pull. He felt it too. And it led him to Tarshish. And ultimately, God had a push and pull that was totally different than Jonah's push and pull. So I agree with that, but it's important to know who is pushing and who is pulling.
And don't just jump because the opportunity exists. I think that's
right.
Jonah too, yeah, the boat was there and the boat was going, but that doesn't mean that you have to jump. So really thinking through those things and I think the hardest part there is that whole conversation, if you're an individual, it needs to happen within yourself and nobody else can really tell you what that is. And if you're a family, each individual in that family needs to have that honest conversation and come to one accord, before you even jump on those things, because people can get into really mucky situations if they just jump too quick and move, especially in a family relationship, move before both parties, both the husband and the wife, have really committed to doing something like this. So I think it's important to notice. Well, for you guys, thank you guys on the chat. I know we're at 7:32. You guys are pretty active. Gary, do you have anything else on Jeremiah 29?
No, I mean, I think again, if you haven't read it lately for yourself, just read. I'd encourage you to read it. And like Darren said, the context is really incredible. We didn't have time to get into that this morning, so it's in the small group discussion. So read that, because there really is a great case study in two people who both say they're speaking for the Lord, saying completely opposite things, and as if glad that never happens anymore. So I think it's a good case study in that. So get involved in that, and then next week we're going to be looking at a great story about that really gets to the essence of two things. One, what is the nature of hope? What does it mean to have hope? And the second thing is God's direction always practical? Like, what is it really practical to do what God's calling me to do, especially when by the world standards, it doesn't appear to be the practical decision? Ultimately, is God's will, is the biblical response always the best and practical response? So we're going to look at that next week through another encounter. We got 2 more weeks in Jeremiah, and then we'll be wrapping it up. And man, it feels like we just scratched the surface. 52 chapters, very complicated. And we've spent, I think, 9 weeks on it. So we've given it a good shot. That's a long series for us, but I feel like it was warranted given the content.
And one of the things I love about the argument there in Jeremiah 28, I think it is if sarcasm that exists. Sometimes I debate, was Jesus sarcastic? No, there's very clear sarcasm there in the Bible. So for all of you who are sarcastic that want to justify sometimes your sin of sarcasm, you can go and read that, and there's some justification there. But I think even along those lines of practical, does it always look good from an earthly standpoint? Because one of the things that Jeremiah really highlights is, oftentimes something that God makes happen is war, is destruction, and some of that stuff doesn't mean God's not there. I think that's part of the message in Jeremiah 29. It's part of the message with Daniel. It's part of the message with all of those who end up going into exile is no, God was there in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the destruction. But I think what's even more important to highlight in all of that, and you did a great job of doing this in the sermon, I thought, was highlighting that God is happy to relent from some of those things if we can turn our hearts to who he was, and even how God did hold back this whole destruction for years because the king was willing to relent. The king was willing to be humble. And so even in this whole thing, just about, how do we make it practical? How do we make it personal? What do we choose to do in a world where, as a church, we've talked about in our regional gatherings that things are kind of wiped clean and a blank slate for us to do some stuff. I think in our personal lives, what's happening with COVID is really a lot of people have blank slates. And as you're doing all that, the importance is just to remain humble the entire time you're making these decisions or whatever you're doing in your life. So just keep up with that. Good luck, guys, on how you're doing that. Next week, we will not have a talk back because of the holiday. And then on the 13th is the next hymn night, I believe. They're dropping that on the 13th. And so just letting you know the next few weeks it's coming up. We got 1 or 2 more weeks of Jeremiah, did you just say?
Yeah, 2 more weeks of Jeremiah.
2 more weeks of Jeremiah. We got those are the next 2 Sunday nights. That's what's happening there. And small groups will launch back on the 13th. If you're interested in a small group, email me, Darren@SSBC, and I would love to talk to you. Thanks, guys. Look forward to seeing y'all later.
Bye. Thanks, Darren.